Okay, now what did you do?
So now I hit in the host code and now we're recording. So
okay. So it's got a okay. I need to leave that there. Okay.
Hey, good afternoon, guys.
Hi, Dana.
hi.
So Dana, what is your official title?
I'm a community designer.
Okay.
Which means nothing to anybody, but that's what it's called. Yeah.
I take it that wasn't your choice, no?
It's just the name of my little sub team.
Okay. And I saw that you went to school in San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, I went to grad school there. That's
okay.
The original planning degree.
Several times.
It's beautiful, right?
Yes. Well, we used to live in San Diego, and so we go, up and go to the Central Coast and do the wine business, and so that was always pretty wonderful.
Yeah, I left about a third of my heart in California.
Oh, really? I didn't leave any of my heart.
Well, I was in the Bay. It's a little different, but
okay. Yeah, no, San Diego was just like the bloom went off the rose a couple of years in. So for me.
Ouch. Wow.
What?
Said ouch.
Well, that's just me. I only speak for myself. I mean, most of the time.
And Carol, I just wanted to do a quick time check. It sounds like most of the agenda is devoted to this conversation. I do have about a 20-minute PowerPoint, and we'll have time for
we
questions after that, but I can shorten it if you
got
like other items.
Okay. That's fine. And that was our intention. It wasn't to really add anything else. We're going to just say a couple things at the beginning. We had 80 people sign up. And so I suspect that some people will drift in, but it's being recorded. So we can put this out there and just tell people, they can look at this at their leisure. So it will, no matter how many people sign in today, they can tap into it later, and we'll put the word out. We do 2 a month. We do these community updates, 2 of them a month through our website. Our secretary does this. And so we'll put that information out for people. So, and we see people, and it's 3:02 and I'm going to get started. All right.
Sounds good.
Good. My name's Carol Hunter, and Brad Revere is here, and Amy Campbell, and we are co-chairs for the Central Park United Neighbors Safe Streets Committee. And Amy just consented to come on, and we're delighted. She's made such a great contribution. Yes, exactly. Thank you for that I agree. We're very grateful. She has many gifts, and she's sharing some of them with us. So we're very happy about that. Central Park United Neighbors is a registered neighborhood organization, also called RHINOs. And there are over 200 of them in Denver, neighborhood organizations that act as resource for their communities. And what I'm learning more and more is that many of us share common issues and concerns and ideas. And so I see us as being, RHINOs as being very collaborative as well. And it's good to know one another's business. And like I said, we provide a resource for the community, and today we certainly are with having Dana here. So we are an all volunteer group, and again, a resource for the community. And we just want to say a couple of things before we get started with Dana. And I see, was Thomas here as well? So we got-
I'm here as well.
Double treat. Thanks, Thomas Shaw, for being here.
Good to see you all.
You guys are great. So the first thing I wanted to do, and this again is another benefit of having Amy with us, she started a spreadsheet to collect data, and we are very grateful for that. So can you say just a bit about that, Amy, before we get started?
Yeah, some of the feedback we got from DOTI helped us hit on this approach to collecting information that we hear from the community about specific intersections, areas that people have identified as being sort of problem areas that could have some safety improvements in terms of street infrastructure.
Right.
And so we wanted to just have a database where we can have all of this information in one place so we can share it with our partners and we can look at it and we can share it with the community. And so part of what we're working on now is figuring out how to make this more widely known so people in the community know to tell us when they have like identified a place that they think could be improved. But yeah.
So we're delighted about that and we appreciate that. And I know, yes, Dana, you appreciate that and Thomas probably does as well. And I used to say to folks, if you don't report it, it never happened. And if you put it on Facebook, it probably never happened either, because it's just got to go further than that. It's got to be documented. So we encourage people to do that, and we will continue to do that as well. And I also wanted to mention that the Central Park United Neighbors, Rhino, has put together a survey that covers any number of things. It's kind of a demographic survey of Central Park, but it's also asking people what their concerns are, what their appreciations of the community are, suggestions. And there are questions on the survey related to safe streets, to transportation issues. And so if I didn't see it on the website, so Brad, did you? I mean, we all got, it was all sent to us if we're signed up, and you're nodding, thank you. But I didn't see anything on the website.
No, we should check on that, because yeah, I think it's, I've only seen it on the website, but we should put it on Facebook and the website and everything.
Okay, I'm going to talk to Mark about that. So I just wanted, but I did want to mention it to the folks here and anybody who's going to be listening to this recording in the future. I want them to be aware of that. So anything else to add before we get started with Dana?
Yeah, I'd like to mention a couple of things. So one is, today is the last day to vote. So get out there and vote, especially, I think one thing that deserves your attention and careful study is the measure 2C, which would give more money to Dana and Thomas to do more mobility improvements like protected bike lanes and pedestrian safety. So if you haven't already, please go vote. And then, second is, we might be covering this in Dana's presentation, but also eagerly awaiting the install of our protected bike lane on Central Park Boulevard as well. But other than that, that's all I have, Carol.
Okay, great. So today we're focused on Dana, who is with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and Thomas Shaw is also here, and we appreciate them. We appreciate their smarts, and we appreciate their willingness to talk to us. Anything that you want us to know about you professionally, Dana, in terms of your background and the things that you work on before you get started?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction, Carol. I appreciate everyone taking the time today to talk with us about this stuff. It really helps us when you are organized and willing to learn and willing to share what's going out on the street. So always like to say thank you for people spending their free time doing this. So I'm Dana Hoffman. I am a community designer. I work with the department. I've been here for about 3 years now. I'm from Denver originally, but I left in time. So I've found that it's changed so much sometimes. It's a whole different city. My role is sort of twofold. One is to coordinate all of our transportation projects that are occurring in Northeast Denver. So that includes obviously the Central Park area, but also includes all of District 8, Council District 8, District 5, and District 11. So part of that goal of that is to keep the community informed about those projects and also make sure that we're not missing opportunities when projects overlap or different work overlaps, and making sure it aligns with the concerns that we're hearing from the community so we don't, redo a road and then have missed the opportunity to make an improvement that's needed. And I think Thomas waved hello at the beginning, but Thomas is also with the department and does some of the amazing technical analysis and engineering work. So I just wanted to have him introduce himself as well directly.
Absolutely. Thomas Shaw. I've been with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure for a little over 2 years now. Work partially as an area engineer for City Council District 8, as Dana mentioned, doing the technical analysis and plan preparation for various types of signing, striping, and signal modifications within that district, as well as some signal rebuild efforts in other parts of the city as well. But those are primarily, or excuse me, two of my primary roles with the city currently.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to mention, if you have a question, if anyone has a question, put it in the chat and Amy will be taking a look periodically, and we'll allow some time for that at the end. Anything else before we get started? Great. Thanks, Dana. You're on.
Oops. So I would love to share a presentation. Whoever's hosting, if you might, is there a way to easily enable share screen for me?
Dana, let me see if I can give you permission here.
Thank you. So while he's doing that, I'll just get started. So I have a little presentation here and it's a mix. So I always find it's really helpful to give a little bit of a primer about how DOTI does our work, especially into relation to sort of transportation issues that are of greatest interest in the area that we're talking. So obviously I've heard from you guys, I reviewed the list of concerns and I wanted to share that little primer. This first part is probably going to be familiar to some of you. I've given a portion of this presentation before, but I do want to take a little time to explain some of our weird rules and tools. We can seem like a black box department at times, so I try to help make it a little clearer. And then we will dive into the specific current concerns that were shared by the CPUN committee. And Amy, thank you so much. It really is helpful to have that kind of organization when we hear from you guys. And then we'll leave, I think we'll have quite a bit of time at the end to answer questions that you guys have. So if there's something burning, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we can try and address it on the spot, but otherwise, yeah, we should have plenty of time to talk through any questions that come up as I go through the presentation.
And you should be able to share now, Dana.
That worked. Are you guys seeing a little PowerPoint screen there?
No.
No? Let's try it again. Oh, that's why. Here we go.
There we go.
Now, perfect. Okay. So let's see, there we go. So yeah, I just sort of went through the agenda items here, but yeah, we'll talk through some of our process and tools. I'll talk through the projects that you can expect to come the end of this year and into next year. And then we'll talk about those specific sort of concerns you guys raised, and we'll spend some time on questions. So just to get us started, I always like to give you guys the big picture to start off. What does our department do? And I'm probably going to start lapsing into our acronyms. So Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, we tend to refer to ourselves as DOTI. I'm not talking about anyone's grandma here. I'm just talking about our department. So what do we do? So we are involved with the plan, design, building, and maintenance, as well as regulation of just about everything in the right-of-way. The right-of-way is, some of you guys are familiar with that term, some of you probably aren't. It's the wonky term to property that really is sort of in the public trust. Typically the primary role of that property is for transportation uses, but it is also used for utilities, and it's obviously a really important communal space for us all in the city. There are lots of different users, and as the city grows, there are even more users out there on the street, and you can see that from here. You know, we have our usual motorists out on the road, but more and more we have lots of pedestrians out on our streets. We have more and more cyclists. We have RTD out on the streets. We have important freight carriers that are using our streets. And then obviously people just out using the streets for business. And since COVID, we've even seen some sort of shared streets extending into those areas. So doing this work really is sort of a balancing act. Sometimes these uses are in direct conflict. A lot of the time they're not, but we have to think about the needs of the various uses of the street. The other thing that's good to really keep in mind, and if you really want to get some sleep in the evening or having trouble sleeping, you could go ahead and pull out this document yourself. But Denver is required to follow the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD. And this is a document that's issued by the federal government, the Federal Highway Administration, and it really sets out a whole set of standards and specifications, as well as guidelines for how our roadways should look. And it's a great document from the standpoint of making sure that our roadways are safe across the United States. There's a lot of studies that back up these guidelines, and making sure we're consistent as you go from place to place. The thing to really know about these is that they can be supplemented by local laws and regulations, but we can't contradict them or we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. So the MUTCD forms sort of the basis of a lot of things we do. Sometimes it's not as what we call progressive as we'd want for some of our uses on our streets, but we do need to abide by it. So I just talked about a rule, so I'm going to talk about a tool to keep us on theme today. So a tool for you guys is 311, and I bet everyone on this call is familiar with 311 and PocketGov, which is the online equivalent versus the number that you can call. We really do really encourage people to use 311 to report all sorts of issues out in the right of way. And that includes these sort of transportation concerns and complaints or safety issues that you encounter. It's not just maintenance, it's all of the above. So it's helpful for you to be able to reach us, and it's really helpful for us because it's really one of the fastest ways to get the issue to the right department and the right division. And it helps us track and make sure with data requests aren't lost. And then it's also useful for us to have that data in aggregate. So I think it's very useful for a CPUN to also have your own tracking list of really high priority items. And you're always welcome to email myself in addition to submitting a 311, just to get more context or information. But it's good to submit 311 every time there is a consideration. Like Carol said, we don't track Facebook. So lots of people post up there, but it's not something that the city obviously looks at from this perspective. So let's just take a minute to say, all right, you submitted a 311, what the heck happens? So this is sort of our warrant process. So I'll walk that through really quickly. So let's say we get a 311 from someone in the Central Park neighborhood that identifies a potential issue. Through that 311 system, our people send it directly to Thomas and myself, since he is the area engineer for District 8, and it's a transportation concern, right? So what Thomas is going to do is look at that location. He might do a site visit. He might say, okay, yes, this is something that our department could potentially address, rather than another department potentially addressing that issue. And then the next stage is typically going out and collecting data. We are a sort of a data-driven department, and I'm going to actually talk through some of the data that we use and how we use it in just a second. But yeah, we'll do things like look at the crash history over the last 3 years, or look at traffic counts. The average daily traffic is what we call that. And based on a set of information, and it varies on what the concern is and what the location is, that's how we can determine if a treatment is warranted. And that's just a terminology that we use to say, yes, it meets the standards, or the data collected allows us to make a decision about this. And from there, in a lot of cases, Thomas is able to write a ticket or work order, and it'll get installed relatively quickly. But depending on the type of treatment that's called for, sometimes we'll have to refer this to another program to actually do something. And that can take longer if it's that kind of treatment that needs to be done, or it needs to be contracted out rather than done by our in-house crews. So that's just a understanding of how what happens when you actually submit a 311 or submit an email to us too. Eventually would sort of go through that same process. So I wanted to dig a little bit more into warrants and how we think about these things. So one of the categories of what goes out on the street that we're all probably very familiar with are traffic control devices, right? So that's our signals, our signs, our markers. And really, when we're thinking about these traffic control devices, we're using them to indicate which user has the right of way. That seems obvious, right? But the important fact here is actually none of these devices are used for traffic calming. And that when I'm saying traffic calming here, I'm really referring to dealing with speed. So we're not ever going to warrant a traffic signal to deal with a speeding issue. The same goes for a stop sign. So something to keep in mind. And I wanted to dig even more a little bit into what it takes to do just a couple of these. So traffic signals. I know there's been desire for new traffic signals in certain areas of Central Park. So when we're looking at installing a new traffic signal, I'm just going to highlight one or two things here. So one, it is a traffic control device. So we use it to regulate who gets to go when, right? And the budget on these things is pretty high. So traffic signals are actually one of our most expensive pieces of equipment to install. We usually have to update a whole intersection if we're putting in a new signal. I've seen signals that cost upwards of $1 million to get in the ground. And they really are right now taking at least 2 years from the time we start design to getting them in the ground. So that's just to set expectations for what it takes to put in a new signal. And the warrant is large volumes of traffic in each direction, right? Are larger roadways that take signals. And then sometimes we will be putting in a traffic signal specifically to address a crash movement. So maybe people are impatient and they are not abiding by their right of way, the right to use that space. So that's when we might put in for a crash reason. And then in general, unless we're in like downtown or very urban environments, they're not going to be closer than 1/4 mile apart from each other. So this is not the full warrant, but should give just like a flavor of what that looks like. And then this is the same thing with stop signs. So much cheaper treatment, right? A stop sign is just a sign on the ground. So that's great. It's a cheaper option for us. And once we do the study might take a couple months to say collect counts. But once we get it out there and write a work order, it might just take a couple weeks for our operations crews to be able to get it into the ground. In Denver, almost every intersection has some kind of right-of-way control, right? So in most cases, if there's not a signal, we're going to have stop sign at least on the minor street or the street carrying less traffic. A 4-way stop sign has additional sort of warrants or standards associated with it. And what we're looking for there is that there is actually a minimum vehicle volume in each direction. And generally it has to be roughly the same volume each direction. That's a pretty standard set of requirements for always stops. And actually there's a lot of national studies about stop signs since they're very frequently requested. So we adhere pretty closely to MUTCD requirements for those. All right, I wanted to jump in now to crossing treatments. I was looking through your list of concerns, and I know Central Park, there are just a lot of questions and concerns about how we can get easier crossing for pedestrians. And we do use traffic control devices in some cases for pedestrian decisions, but the process we go to approve these is a little bit different. We look for a different set of things. And I know I pointed a couple of you guys to this document before, but this is a great tool for you if you really want to dive into what the city does. This is a case where we published online. You can find this. You can just Google Denver Uncontrolled Pedestrian Crossing Guidelines and find this PDF document online. And it really details how we walk through the process and which criteria we're looking for when we decide to install a new crosswalk or a new crossing treatment of some kind. And I just want to highlight, so there's different levels that we'll talk through a little bit more, but there's markings and signings, which is sort of the first level. Sometimes there's a pedestrian island and a crosswalk, and sometimes there's just a warning sign. So there's a first level of treatment. There's rapid rectangular flashing beacons. There are a couple of these in Central Park already today. They're not too common, but it's a pedestrian activated signal. It flashes lights and reminds drivers that a pedestrian is crossing there. It's a second level treatment. A third level treatment on really high volume streets is a hybrid beacon. Often we call these a HAWK as an acronym, and it really looks like a signal, but it's also activated by pedestrians. It's not designed for just controlling right of way for vehicles. It really is designed to allow for safe crossing. And then I have in sort of as a caveat, the multi-way stop sign. So as I mentioned, stop signs aren't really used for traffic calming. They're also actually not generally used for pedestrian crossing. That's not what we're looking for when we warrant a stop sign, but there are a specific subset of cases, mostly when we're looking at right next to a school, when we will install a new four-way stop sign or stop sign treatment to facilitate crossing specifically. This is getting a little technical and in the weeds, but if you want to follow along, this is a lovely long chart or tree of decision making that we use that's in that guidelines document. And one thing I wanted to highlight for you guys is that we are actually on the brink of a new process that should make it a little easier for our staff to put in crossing treatments more quickly. So if you were to follow this down, you'd start an assessment, and the very first thing typically we did in the past was to collect how many pedestrians were crossing the street. And we were looking for 20 pedestrians in an hour. And if it didn't meet that threshold, typically it was not going to be warranted to put a crossing treatment in, except in some very specific circumstances. But our staff have been working really hard, and Thomas has been really involved with this and looking at a new criteria that essentially is like a points-based system where before we have to get to the going and collecting 20 peds an hour, which is actually very expensive for us and takes a lot of time before we can respond to you guys. We look and see if it meets these sort of a point threshold, and if it does, then we can move forward without collecting those counts. Hopefully you follow along there. But so that looks at things like, is there a school right there? Is there a really dense sort of land use in place? What are the volumes on the street? And there's about 10 of these criteria. We can answer questions about this at the end, but those allow us to make that decision. So it's a slightly different process that we are still in review on, but will likely be adopted and we will start using in the very near future. So we're very excited about that. And then just over here, I'm just showing sort of that table we use of what type of street and then which type of treatment we will put in ABC from the previous slide, just for reference for you. And then ever so briefly, I wanted to talk about what traffic calming is. Obviously, we're not using traffic controlled devices for traffic calming. So the first thing I always like to point out is that traffic calming almost always really does require more than an engineering solution. This is what we do. Our engineers build things in the road to help facilitate what's supposed to happen there, right? So we can, through some treatments, help influence how fast people travel, but almost always we need some level of enforcement to be used, and education of the community about why it's important, and the law are also really important. If you have someone who's flagrantly ignoring the speed limit and going 80 miles an hour, there aren't any darn treatments we can put on the road that's going to stop that particular person. So we really need the help of these other tools to do that work. The most typical thing we're going to do, and there are other things, but I'm not going to spend time on them in this presentation today, is using a variable speed control sign if we see speeding. But we do define speeding in a very particular way, and this also comes from national standards. And that is that the 85th percentile, so if you had 100 vehicles, it would be that 85 vehicles are traveling at or below the speed limit. And if folks are going, the 85th percentile is 10 miles over the speed limit. That is typically when we're going to take action with an infrastructure response. So it's I'd say a fairly high threshold on a local street to see that level of speeding, but that is what we're looking for when we're looking at speed alone as a reason to provide treatment. All right, so moving on from that primer, hopefully I didn't put anyone to sleep. I see a bunch of questions in the chat. If anything's burning, this would be a good point to stop, but we can also get to a lot of these at the end. So unless someone raised their hand real loud, I'll move on.
Yeah, I think they might come up. Some of them are specific, to the specific intersections,
Location.
And then a lot.
We'll get to some specifics. So if they are about that, let's hold off. So let me go through some of our upcoming projects. So this is all of Council District 8 here. So we do have quite a few projects in this general area. Central Park has a fewer number of projects, and some of that's just the fact that these are newer roadways and are much more likely to meet our standards and not need as much maintenance or change. But I did want to highlight a couple things that are coming up that I'm very excited about. So the first one Brad already mentioned is the Central Park Boulevard Protected Bike Lane. This is a major project. It was funded through the last bond issuance. So the voters asked for this. And it's been several years coming, but it will be going in this November. Flyers are going out probably this week. So this will be installed after a significant design process with community engagement involved. And what will happen is that there will be an improved protected bike lane on Central Park Boulevard between Montview and 36th. In this case, protected means there is a parking lane that will be moved out from the curb that will separate bikes from vehicles. There will also be a vertical protection in the form of what we call flex posts and parking curbs. In addition to that, there's sort of intersection level treatments that I'm highlighting here. I know it's fairly small, but these sort of treatments really help the bike lane through the intersection, and also should have some ancillary benefits of providing more space or a narrower crossing distance for pedestrians. So for a number of concerns on Central Park, I think this should provide some benefit in addition to any other treatments we're doing there. And some of y'all know this, that the community voted and asked for a specialized symbol here. And thanks to your Transportation Managed Association, which will be maintaining these, you'll get little bike dog symbols instead of the standard biker. So that should be fun. In addition, late season here and in concert with our paving, we were able to install some bikeways that are in our bike plan from the Denver Moves plan. And that includes a section of Prairie Meadows and 51st Avenue, which will be a buffered bike lane throughout that stretch. There should have already been notices that have gone out along the corridor, and specific notices. Some of you who are familiar with this area know that some of the street is used pretty heavily by freight for parking. They have been given notice that will no longer be available. There are other areas that they can utilize in the industrial area. And similarly, Dallas Street also will be getting a new buffered bicycle lane. So some new bike treatments and connectivity in the Central Park area, all coming in sort of at the end of our install season before the winter sets in. All right, so we're gonna now dive into the specific set of concerns that the CPUN committee sent to me. If there are other locations with specific concerns, we can try to answer questions or at least take notes on those at the end. I'm gonna run through these fairly quickly, but I am very happy to talk through how we got to these results. So there were quite a few uncontrolled pedestrian crossing requests, meaning there isn't sort of an existing stop sign or signal at that location. Thomas has been looking at these pretty extensively and seeing what our new criteria as well would help us with to qualify for. So Montview and Willow did meet the criteria. So we will be installing a crossing treatment there. It most likely would be a rapid flashing beacon, but we have not confirmed that at this time. 33rd and Central Park Boulevard, we actually do need to collect additional counts at this location for travel. And 56th Avenue and Beeler, we did actually end up collecting pedestrian counts, and it far and away meets our criteria. So a crossing treatment will be installed there as well. This one again will most likely be that HAWK, sort of that pedestrian activated signal, but we don't quite know just yet. That is a bigger investment, so more time will be needed to look into that one. Moving on to Central Park Boulevard and 29th Avenue. There's been a request to see if there is a way to allow more crossing time for pedestrians. The signal time is being evaluated. There's some sort of technical difficulties here to make sure that we can do that. So we're still looking into that option. I also wanted to point out that with the Central Park Boulevard, at least moving east to west, PBL, the actual feel of the crossing distance of this road will be lower as pedestrians can kind of step out into that bike lane space in most cases and cross the street. That should help. And then there is some new bicycle detection. So specifically for bicyclists on 29th, they should be detected more easily now. We put in some newer technology here to help facilitate that here. So there's a little bit of a question mark on the signal timing, but there are some improvements coming your way here. Central Park Boulevard and 33rd Avenue. Again, some interest in better pedestrian crossing. The signal timing is being evaluated. Again, oh, I think I put in the wrong information here. See, I am blanking on what we had looked at here. I forgot to update this slide. Thomas, do you recall what was going on at this location?
I do. So we had received some requests for pedestrian crossing treatments, as well as looking into a traffic signal based on an investigation that was completed in, I believe, late 2019 or early 2020. Neither of the two were met. However, again, with respect to the pedestrian crossing treatment, that evaluation was completed previously with our current pedestrian crossing guidelines. And then now that we're revisiting that with our new pedestrian guidelines, it's kind of being escalated. Again, more of those intersections that are being captured as that with that new process are maybe ones that would have otherwise been a little more uncomfortable to cross or so long that maybe we wouldn't initially see that first checkpoint of 20 peds. So like you're saying, hopefully we'll be, yeah, we don't need as many counts, but can kind of go off the land use, and we'll be working through that a little bit more once that gets adopted here soon.
Thank you for reminding me there. Okay. All right, so next up, so we've also heard that there's concern about speeding along Central Park Boulevard. And that I don't think is specific to this area, but is the sense that it's specifically egregious between 56th Avenue and 61st as you move north. So we did actually collect speed data at, I think, 58th in November of last year. What we found is that the speeds were between 33 and 34 miles an hour, depending on the direction. So it's just a tad above the speed limit in that area, but it doesn't exceed that sort of warrant thresholds that we talked about, that 85th percentile speed. So at the moment, there isn't sort of a specific treatment related to speeding there. We obviously want to continue to monitor Central Park Boulevard, and we'll be looking at sort of the safety along this part of the corridor for sure. Uwenta and 35th Avenue, I know there's general concerns about as that new development comes in and making sure there's safety for everybody crossing in this space. I have shared this with the committee, and I think you guys are directly in touch with Brookfield as well, but a fully signalized intersection is coming here. So the developer will be building the signal. Our understanding is that it will definitely be starting by the end of the year. They had initially hoped to have that complete before the end of the year. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but they don't always tell us their exact timeline until they come up for review. So that's our status on that one at the moment. On Emporia Street, I know there have been ongoing concerns about general traffic and also safety and related to the amount and volume and size of vehicles between 26 and MLK, probably serving those commercial uses to the south in Aurora. We did take counts initially in sort of April of 2019, and they did show an unusually high number of freight. And what we went through and did was install no truck signs, but also designed a sort of truck routing. So there's a preferred direction for large vehicles to take. That does seem to have made a moderate difference. Counts were taken again due to concerns in 2020. The freight had dropped to below 3% of total traffic, which is our general thresholds for specifically taking action on freight when we can. And the speeds are actually below the speed limit on that 85th percentile measure. So we'll continue to monitor this. I understand that there is a quite a bit of new development that is happening in Aurora. We will have conversations with their staff as that project moves forward, but in general, we don't have a warrant to do any additional treatments here. Once that development is in, or sort of on our 3-year rolling timeline of 2023, we can certainly reassess at this location. All right, so Syracuse and 28th, sounds like there's general safety concerns here. I know there was a recent crash here that was fairly serious. In the past, this location has actually had a fairly serious crash trend. So in 2019, daylighting was completed, which basically means that you make sure cars are not in the way, there's not foliage in the way, so that everyone has a good view as they cross through the intersection. And stop bars were added. So I actually don't think those are showing up on this old aerial I have. But after those treatments were installed, we actually did see a very significant drop in crashes. I know again that there was a crash this year, but after reviewing all of the crash history this year compared to the past, we aren't seeing any particular trend that would require additional treatment at this time. So we'll keep an eye on this intersection, but there's no action at the moment. Whew. We got through all of those. I'm sure there are quite a few questions. I see 20 in the chat, so we can open it up for that. I don't know if one of the committee board members wants to share those questions in a particular order, or we can just jump down the line, whatever is.
Yeah, I can read them in the chat, but I think Andrew has his hand up. If you want to go first while I'm looking through the chat.
That sounds good.
Absolutely. So I live on Emporia Street between 26th and MLK, and it's not necessarily the generic volume of traffic. It is the exceptions rather than the rules, right? So the challenges here is this street, when it was built, clearly was not built to be a through street, such as Fulton or any of the other north-south streets, yet it's receiving the same volumes of traffic because it is a direct connection into a light industrial neighborhood in Aurora at the Stanley. And so the commercial traffic is certainly one of those things. I am literally sitting and looking out my window and I watch it every day. We get commercial traffic screaming by. One of the problems that we experience is that nobody sees the stop signs, right? Maybe a daylighting exercise would be good, but because this is such a small residential street, it doesn't have stop bars and it does not have marked crosswalks. So there's a completely uninterrupted strip that looks like basically a drag race strip, both for commercial trucks and irresponsible drivers. We've had multiple hit and runs. We've had one of which involved a child. It's excessive in general and statistically applied to a standard normal curve. Maybe not, but the exceptions when you see them and they're happening are egregious, right? And we're talking about parks that have toddler structures on them, like aligned directly and adjacent directly to the roadway. Confrontations between residents and drivers, drivers feeling emboldened to, lash out when they're being told to slow down. I mean, it's hugely problematic, even though the numbers may not necessarily show what we're talking about. And then secondly, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit would put them traveling at 35 miles per hour. That is the equivalent of going somewhere around 95 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour zone, right? Certainly egregious. 5 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone is 40% over the speed limit on a residential street, 25 mile an hour. So, I mean, that threshold seems absolutely inappropriate when we're talking about slow traffic, residential streets that were never necessarily designed to be, throughway arteries. And so any sort of special consideration would be hugely helpful there. Traffic calming, marked crosswalks, anything would be better than what we have right now.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I recognize your frustration, and I know that the volumes are Higher than a lot of our local streets. We've looked at this pretty extensively, and there isn't a particular treatment that we can do from a traffic calming perspective at the moment. If there are stop signs that are being egregiously blown through, I think we can check again to see if we can install stop bars at those locations, but that's probably all I can promise at this time.
Well, and it's not even that they're blowing through it. They're coming to a screeching halt from an excessive speed, right? So they're getting up to 30 miles an hour because they see a wide open stretch, and then all of a sudden, bang, there's a stop sign. There's one right outside my house. And so you get screeching tires and brakes pretty regularly. You get people going through it, like stopping past the sign, which is a pedestrian problem and a cross traffic problem as well.
I think the other thing, like I mentioned, traffic calming, we would benefit from sending out DPD again. I think we sent folks out there about 6 months ago, but I will get back in touch with District 2, which is your area DPD folks. You can also do that directly, Andrew. I don't know if you've ever done that.
I've requested it before, and they've said that they've come out and found no conclusive, whatever. And it's like, great. Okay. I have a radar gun myself. I can stand here and take video of people speeding on the street. Admittedly, they're probably not getting over 30 miles an hour, but 30 miles an hour compared to 25 miles an hour when it comes to stop distances and unexpected obstructions makes the difference between a dead child and a living child, right?
Well, I was just going to jump in because I know there's a 20 is plenty campaign, and I don't know, I mean, this is not DOTI's campaign, I don't think, but if that is passed and adopted by the city council, then 20 miles per hour would be the speed limit on all the residential streets. And so if this 85% speeding number, I mean, everything's going to start to go down. So I guess, I'm assuming DOTI would still be following the MUTCD regulation, but then the threshold I would guess you would have to meet to make some changes would be lower speeds. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Amy. So that's something that we can't change until we get action from city council. It's in the ordinance, which is why it's at city council's door. So if they do that, then this all citywide speed limit will drop to 20, and we would be looking at it with that new threshold. And that's true for us as well as the police. So they would be enforcing to that speed limit as well. So I do believe that will help. And I am going to call them. I hear you, Andrew, that they come out sometimes, but I'm going to ask them to come out again. And Thomas and I will look at the stop bars as well. That does tend to help with complying and stopping behind the stop sign. So we'll leave that there for now.
That would be great. Yes, just something interrupting the long drag strip nature of the street that drivers can tell, oh, I'm going to be stopping in 100 yards rather than building a head of steam.
So two quick notes there. So one is, as Amy just mentioned, the 20 is plenty campaign. If and when city council takes up that measure, I think the last time I read it might spill into next year. We'll certainly let everybody know. And I think that's a great opportunity to contact our not only district representative in city council, but also our 2 at-large representatives as well, to share our thoughts on how that's, what we feel about that. And then second, I know we only have about 12 minutes left. So Amy, is there another question we can elevate? Hopefully we can get to like maybe a couple more.
Yeah, I think Abe's question is really interesting about one of the DOTI rules that was mentioned, like counting 20 pedestrians an hour. And he was bringing up, what if the current conditions of the road deter pedestrians from even using the road? And so how does that factor into, are there enough pedestrians to warrant some sort of enhancement? Maybe those pedestrians would show up if the enhancement was there. So like, how does that cycle work? And maybe these new rules, this new flow chart you're talking about might address that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Abe. So it can be, well, I'm getting a little back up here, but it can be a little bit of a chicken and egg, right? Especially on larger streets where pedestrians might otherwise be pretty deterred from crossing. And that's one of the reasons why we're pretty excited about this new set of criteria. It allows us to first look at essentially what the demand could be by looking at the land uses, and if there's vulnerable users like children who are going to be using that frequently, if there was a much safer crossing for them. So I do think that will help facilitate us making that crossing improvement decision in those sort of situations where it's a street that people would love to cross at that location very frequently, but won't due to safety issues. So yeah, I think this new standard will be really helpful on that score.
Sarah is bringing up, there's supposed to be a new crossing treatment at Martin Luther King Boulevard in Clinton. Is that correct?
Yep, Sarah, that's still correct. It's on the list to go out likely early next year. Thomas, I believe the order is written, but will probably go in the spring or something like that. Can you clarify on that point?
I can. So early in 2021, we had enough of a backlog of RFB installations that it was added to the top of the list for 2022. Once that fiscal year begins, we should be able to procure materials and work through the implementation of that crossing treatment.
There's a question about sort of light timing and crossing near Northfield High School. So that Sandoval campus also has been getting a lot of discussion in the neighborhood about parking. So has DOTI done any studies, or is there anything you could comment on about that particular area of the neighborhood? Kind of.
Dana, do you want me?
Yeah, I think Thomas has been studying that. It'd be good to know if there's a particular intersection or just sort of generally around Northfield High.
So working both with the school and some residents that are submitting 301 cases, we have modified or introduced additional no parking signs, as well as parking changes. Adjacent to the school, we introduced more of a loading zone to try to keep people from pulling into the northbound right turn lane at Central Park and 56 to keep that turn lane moving. And then specifically with the signal timing, we weren't able to just modify the timing. It's going to require more of what we call a minor rebuild to actually reconfigure and remove and replace certain types of detection devices and signal equipment to get the crossing treatment that we want for that school phase that's on the east leg. So have had some review with my supervisors and senior engineers and operations to get that going. But that is hopefully in addition to the warrant analysis that might be more of a long-term treatment at 56 and Beeler, some things that we're looking at implementing there for the Northfield High School Sandoval campus.
Amy, I'm going to elevate one I saw early on in the chat. I think it's broadly applicable to a couple of questions and issues people have brought up. But one is, what traffic calming measures are potentially available maybe on sort of residential streets, kind of like Andrew was talking about, streets that maybe were never intended to carry a lot of traffic, but are seeing a lot more as the area grows, but maybe don't meet a threshold in terms of excess speeding. But are there any sort of traffic calming measures? Like, it's funny, I have one of my neighbors on the call here today. People will say, like, let's park our biggest cars on the sides of the street so that it technically narrows the lanes that people come, so people drive a little bit slower. But I'm curious from DOTI's perspective, on residential streets, are there any solutions available and what conditions might need to be met to implement those if they are available?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. Yeah, so at the moment, we are looking at a couple different criteria or thresholds on local streets or any street. So there's the safety consideration, and we're typically going to rely on crash picture for that. And we recognize that sometimes there's close calls as well, but we look at the crash, we look at that speed data, and then we look at if there are specific land uses or vulnerable users along the street. And then there's sort of an added layer here of what the use of that street is. So some of our streets are now pegged to be neighborhood bikeways, and we call them bikeways, but they really are meant to be sort of an alternative user above vehicle user streets. So a lot of traffic calming street treatments are sort of being piloted and looked at on streets that are pegged as neighborhood bikeways. that is near Central Park is the Kearney Cremeria Bikeway that's designed today. And then we use those driver feedback signs if we do see sort of a ongoing issue in the area. But yeah, I hear the concern and frustration that there aren't that many tools that we use on local streets unless we're meeting those criteria. That's something I think the city is continuing to look at and think about as we grow. The 20 is Plenty campaign is one of those things. But yeah, keep looking into it. But at the moment, those really are the thresholds. We're looking at those safety considerations and those speed considerations and the specific user situations to install very specific treatments. So the more specific you can get, if you're like submitting a 311 about a location, the better for us to see if any of our thresholds apply there to do something.
Got it. Thanks, Dana.
There's also a question about speed bumps or speed humps and traffic circles. And I know we've gotten a lot of feedback from neighbors that would, like, why doesn't Denver use them more often? I don't know if Dottie has a perspective on those.
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. So speed humps and bumps are actually slightly different things, but I'm not going to get into the weeds there. So at the moment, the city of Denver does not ever use them. Aurora does, and I know there's some confusion about what is where. And that comes from sort of a long conversation with mostly our emergency vehicle providers and our maintenance vehicle providers. They are definitely more difficult to deal with for those users. Our emergency vehicle drivers are very concerned about use of them, but it has actually been raised as a conversation to reconsider whether we can use those in the near future. But we do continue to hear a lot of those concerns from those users of our street and providing the right response times. So for the immediate foreseeable future, that's not a tool in Denver's toolkit. Traffic circles, which are different than roundabouts. Roundabouts are used on larger streets as a traffic control device, actually. Roundabouts are different, but traffic circles we do implement. Currently, they're still sort of being only used on those neighborhood bikeways as they're newer for us. And where we've used them, they haven't actually provided the speed benefits we thought they would. So we're continuing to sort of tweak and experiment with those, but I expect that they will, once we iron that out, we'll be using them more frequently.
And there's one question about excessive car volumes. Are they ever considered in the thresholds that you use to evaluate? And I think, well, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so I'd say sort of typically not. So there's sort of a total volume, say our local streets can handle, but that total volume is much higher than the standard person would want to experience. It's about 3,000 vehicles a day. So cut through traffic or traffic volume is not something that our department really looks at. We're looking at safety and we're looking at speed and mobility. And those are all linked to sort of the volume of vehicles that are traveling down a road, but those are what we're looking at, not at the volumes themselves typically.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I would like to actually continue a conversation, or it's like a research project around the whole bumps or whatever they're called, because I'm thinking about all of the cities in the United States and in the world that have snow and have ice and face some of the same things Denver does. And interestingly, yes, Aurora does this, but Denver doesn't, and their weather is no different than ours. So I just think that it bears some research, and I am interested enough to maybe get that ball rolling. And so I will continue that, and I'll chat with our committee about that as well. Is there anything else that's burning with anybody that's on any of our attendees before we take off? And we're going to lose it in about 2 minutes here. We've got it. Anything else? No?
I would say, one, thank you, Dana and Thomas, for being with us. This is above and beyond, I think, the call of your job. So we appreciate you engaging with us. And I think we hope to make this at least maybe once or twice a year a regular practice if you're not sick of us. And then second, another research project, Carol's like, maybe we should figure out how to get more streets classified as neighborhood bikeways too. That's another idea I was thinking about as this was going on. But mostly want to say thank you to Dana and Thomas for engaging with us. It looks like Dana put her contact info in the chat. So take that down if you'd like that. And then for everybody that attended the call today, thank you. I do think this is not just a once a month thing. Carol, Amy and I and several on this call are actively sort of thinking about how can we make our neighborhood safer to walk, bike, and roll. So please stay engaged with us in between meeting times here. Anything else, Carol or Amy, I missed?
That's it. A very big thank you to Thomas.
Thank you guys, I really appreciate you inviting us on. It's really helpful to talk with people directly, and we're happy to come back. And as long as we follow the same format, it just worked really well in hearing about specific concerns up front. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Take care.